My name is Caroline Bishop, and the moment I stood up at that dinner table, everything changed. My hand was trembling as I raised my glass, not to toast, but to reclaim the truth. "This is for the money you stole," I said to my father, before sliding a manila envelope across the table. Inside, the official notice revoking their invitation to my wedding, and the wire receipt showing the $60,000 wedding trust had just been legally reclaimed, in my name only. Lucas leaned over and added, "And since you like surprises, here's another. We're not just engaged. We're leaving for Tuscany in the morning without you." Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you, this story might just hit home. The walls were walnut-paneled, old Southern money in every detail. You could smell the history, mahogany polish, faint cigar smoke, and something colder, like tension passed down in a family line. I was sitting at the far end of a long conference table in a law office in downtown Wilmington, North Carolina, my grandmother's favorite city. Her name, Marjorie Lane Bishop, was embossed in gold on the legal folders laid out before us. It was supposed to be a quiet, respectful will reading. But the moment the attorney, Mr. Caro, said my name, I felt it like a slap. "To my granddaughter Caroline Elizabeth Bishop," he read, his voice calm, "I leave a private wedding trust in the amount of $60,000, set aside since her 12th birthday to be released upon her engagement or marriage." I blinked. My throat went dry. Then came the sound. A low, guttural chuckle from him. My father, Charles Bishop, leaned back in his leather chair with a scoff. "That money should have gone to someone responsible," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. I turned, too stunned to respond, and caught a smirk curling on my sister's face. "Kayla, seriously," she said, arms folded tight like she was holding something in. "You're not even engaged. Why should you get it?" My pulse quickened. Of course she'd say that. Kayla always had a talent for speaking in ways that cut through skin and settled into bone. "Mr. Caro adjusted his glasses, clearly uncomfortable. "The trust was created solely in Caroline's name," he clarified. Mrs. Bishop was quite firm in her instructions. "Of course she was," Kayla said, laughing bitterly. "Caroline could do no wrong in Grandma's eyes, always the little favorite." I opened my mouth, but my father raised a hand toward Kayla, not to stop her but to let her vent. "I had no idea," I said, my voice small. "She never told me." "Oh, come on," Kayla snapped. "You didn't need to know. You've always had the golden halo. Grandma never saw the real you." I looked at her, really looked, and saw something I hadn't before: fear. Not of me but of being left out, of being second. "And maybe that's what bothers you most," I said slowly. "That she saw me, chose me." The room fell into a brittle silence. I looked around. My mother's gaze was fixed on the tablecloth. My father's jaw twitched with restraint. Kayla's eyes, angry, glassy, locked with mine like a dare. I wanted to say more, to scream or cry or flee. But instead I sat there and listened as they dissected my worth like it was up for debate. When the meeting ended, Mr. Caro handed me a sealed envelope. "The trust details," he said gently. "It's yours, take your time reviewing it." As I stepped into the warm afternoon sunlight, the air hit me like a splash of reality. I clutched the envelope tight against my chest. $60,000. It didn't feel like a gift. It felt like a match tossed into gasoline. Because if my family had always resented me, this just gave them a reason to make it known. The colonial-style home I grew up in still looked pristine from the outside. White shutters, a porch swing that creaked in the breeze, a perfectly trimmed lawn. But stepping through the front door felt like walking into a cage lined with wallpaper. I hadn't planned on moving back. Not like this. "Just until I get on my feet," I'd told myself, clutching a duffel bag and my grandmother's envelope like they were life preservers. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't a temporary stop. This was a retreat, one forced by humiliation and a bank account that didn't reflect the promise of that $60,000 wedding trust. Because it wasn't mine. Not yet. Not until I proved something. "Don't get too comfortable," my father said as I stepped inside, not even looking up from his recliner. The game was on, beer in hand, same as always. "This isn't the Four Seasons." I didn't answer. Just climbed the stairs to my old room. It still had the faded lilac wallpaper from high school, the same warped spot on the floorboard by the closet door, And the same narrow twin bed I once cried myself to sleep in after Kayla spread lies about me stealing her jeans in 10th grade. Some things never changed. That night at dinner, I sat at the table with the three of them, Mom, Dad, Kayla, just like old times. Except now the air had weight. Every glance was laced with judgment, every bite chewed like a silent accusation. Mom passed me the green beans with a tight smile. "So," she said lightly, "what are your plans now that you're back?" Before I could answer, Dad cut in. "She should focus on finding a real job, not counting inheritance dollars that aren't hers yet." I blinked. Mom gave him a warning look, but he ignored it. "And not leave dishes in the sink like she did this morning," he added, tossing a glance at Kayla, who giggled softly. "I rinsed them and left them to dry," I said, surprised at how shaky my voice sounded. "Well, they're your dishes. Take responsibility," he said with a shrug. "This isn't your college dorm." "Actually," Kayla piped in, not missing her chance to dig deeper, "I remember you were kind of messy back then too. Always leaving your laundry for Mom." "I did my own laundry since middle school," I said, sharper now. "You're the one who never mind." My mother set down her fork. "We're not here to argue, we're just saying it might help if you showed some initiative." I swallowed hard, looking around the table. My fork stayed on my plate, untouched. Their words clung to me like the smell of fried oil in cheap diners. Initiative. I was working 2 jobs before I even finished my degree. I saved, budgeted, hustled. And yet here I was, back in a house that never quite loved me the way it claimed to. They didn't see the Caroline I'd become. They still saw the version of me they had created. The soft one, the girl who took blame just to keep peace, the girl who apologized for existing too loudly. So I said nothing. After dinner, I offered to clean up. My mother didn't thank me. She simply gestured to the sink like it was a command, not a favor. As I scrubbed the pans, the voices from the living room drifted in, TV static, laughter, then Kayla's voice. "She's probably already planning how to spend Grandma's money. Spa days, I bet, or yoga retreats, that's her idea of working hard." I gripped the sponge so tight the seams split at the edge. I thought about turning off the faucet and marching in there. I imagined shouting something cutting, something final. Instead, I kept scrubbing. Let them talk. Let them laugh. I wouldn't break. Not in front of them. Later, upstairs, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the dinner word for word, tone by tone. My fingers brushed over the envelope from Grandma that I still hadn't opened fully, not because I didn't want to, but because I knew the moment I did it would become real. Tangible. A line drawn in the sand. A line I couldn't uncross. My phone buzzed with a text from my childhood friend Harper. "Hey, heard about your grandma, I'm so sorry. Wanna grab coffee this week?" I didn't answer. Not yet. I needed to figure out what I was doing, who I even was in this moment. The next morning I woke up to the sound of voices downstairs, loud, amused, laughter, Kayla and my dad again. I padded into the hallway, barefoot, heart thudding. "She really thinks she's the favorite now?" Kayla's voice floated up. "Like she's owed something, it's hilarious." "She's always been dramatic," Dad replied. "Let her think she won something, won't last long." I leaned against the wall, my breath catching. They didn't know I was listening, and I didn't know whether to cry or rage. The first thing I noticed that morning was the smell of burnt toast. The second was the sound of Kayla's laugh, sharp, mean, carrying through the thin walls like she wanted me to hear. I moved slowly, not because I was tired, but because I was bracing. Every hallway here felt like a hallway to an ambush. And I wasn't wrong. As I reached the kitchen doorway, I heard her say it. "She really thinks she's the favorite now, what a joke." She was on her phone, barefoot, sitting cross-legged on the counter like we were back in high school, and she still ruled the house. Dad said she's probably gonna spend it on some self-discovery retreat, like Bali or some nonsense. She laughed again. "Yeah, seriously, she's got main character syndrome. Trust me, it's exhausting." I didn't step in. I stood there in the hallway, just listening. I'd like to say I felt numb, but the truth. I felt everything, all at once. The betrayal, the humiliation, the dull ache that comes from realizing your own family sees you not as a person but as a walking inconvenience. She continued, barely lowering her voice. "I mean, how are you gonna live in your parents' house and still act like you're better than everyone else? She doesn't even have a boyfriend. Like, what's the plan here, marry the trust fund?" Something inside me twisted. But I stayed frozen, hidden just out of sight. Then came the part that really hurt. She was Grandma's puppet, always doing chores, always saying thank you like it made her special. And now she thinks she deserves 60 grand because of it? A beat. Yeah, pathetic. I backed away before she saw me. I didn't want the satisfaction on her face. Instead, I walked straight to the laundry room, grabbed a basket of dirty clothes, and started scrubbing at them like they'd insulted me too. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps. Mom leaned in through the doorway with a sigh. "Caroline, I've asked you not to leave towels on the floor. It's creating mildew behind the hamper." I turned slowly. "Those weren't mine." "Well, just be mindful," she said, already halfway down the hall. "Also, next time, could you iron your father's shirts? I found 3 wrinkled on the drying rack." No thank you, no consideration, just expectation. I stood in that small laundry room, holding a damp towel in my hands, and felt the pressure building again. I wanted to scream, or maybe just leave and never look back, but instead I answered with something else. Lifting my voice just enough to carry through the house, I called out, "Don't worry, I'll wash the sins out too if they fit in the machine." There was silence. Then Kayla's sharp voice from the kitchen, "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't reply. I let the words hang like steam in the air, hot, heavy, undeniable, because I was tired of being their emotional maid, their easy target, their silent sponge for blame and bitterness. I folded the damp clothes, one by one, taking my time, and as I worked I thought about the envelope upstairs. I hadn't touched it since the will reading. It still sat untouched in my nightstand, tucked beneath an old photo of Grandma and me, her in her rose garden, me in a crooked sun hat, both of us laughing like the world didn't know how to reach us there. That memory, that kind of love, it made me ache. Because it reminded me that I did matter to someone, that my worth wasn't invisible, even if it felt that way now. That night at dinner, no one brought up my earlier comment, but the tension was thicker than gravy. Dad grumbled about the water bill. Kayla picked at her salad like she was too important to chew lettuce. And Mom asked again if I had sent out any job applications today. I lied and said yes. I didn't feel like explaining that I had, in fact, rewritten my resume 3 times only to delete it all and stare at the blinking cursor until my chest hurt. After dinner, I skipped dessert, climbed the stairs 2 at a time, and shut the door to my room without a word. Once inside, I finally opened the envelope. Inside was a detailed letter from Grandma's attorney. Account access information. A handwritten note from her, yellowed and fragile, dated 2 years ago. "Dearest Caroline," it read, "if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, but you're not. You are still here, still growing, still becoming. Use this gift not because others think you don't deserve it, but because I know you do. With love, always, Grandma." I didn't cry. But something broke open in me. Not like a dam, more like a door. A quiet click. A breeze of possibility rushing in. 1 week later, I stood in the driveway with my suitcase zipped to bursting, and a second-hand tote slung over my shoulder. The house behind me loomed like a tomb of every version of me I was finally leaving behind. No one came out to say goodbye. Not that I expected them to. Mom had muttered something about wishing me luck over her morning tea, never looking up from her crossword. Dad didn't even bother coming downstairs. Kayla, predictably, hadn't said a word since the laundry room standoff. But I didn't need their permission. Not anymore. What I needed was a job, a place, a sliver of peace. I booked a cheap room at a weekly rental complex in downtown Charleston near King Street, far enough to breathe, close enough to try. The walls were thin, the bed creaked, and the water pressure in the shower was somewhere between a mist and a prayer. But it was mine. No critiques, no eavesdropping. Just me, my thoughts, and the beginnings of something that might become a life again. I started work 2 days later at a cafe called Baylight. It had soft lighting, mismatched chairs, and the kind of charm that made people think they'd discovered it even if it had been open for 6 years. I was hired on the spot. Not because I was impressive, but because the previous waitress had quit mid-shift and left her apron in the sink. My first day was brutal. The lunch rush hit like a wave, orders barked out, trays wobbling in my hands, my feet screaming in shoes that looked nice but weren't made for double shifts. "Hey, table 4 asked for oat milk, not dairy," a barista called to me as I rushed past. "Caroline, you forgot the side salad on the cob again," the kitchen staff chimed in. I was a mess of apologies, sweat, and frizzed hair. But I didn't cry. I didn't run. Because for the first time in months, I wasn't invisible. I was just new. By closing, I could barely feel my legs. I leaned against the breakroom sink, blinking at my reflection, mascara smudged, collar stained with espresso foam, eyes rimmed red from trying not to tear up when a customer yelled at me for bringing the wrong check. That's when I met her, June. She worked the late shift at the front counter, mid-30s, warm brown eyes, blunt bob haircut. She walked in carrying a tray of clean mugs and set it down beside me. "You're Caroline, right?" I nodded, too tired to pretend I wasn't dying inside. "You look like someone who needs carbs and a compliment," she said. Then she handed me a day-old scone and added, "You've got heart. That matters more than money in a place like this." I blinked. Then I laughed. The sound startled me. It had been a while. "Thanks," I said, tearing the scone in half. "I think my heart's currently hiding in my left shoe." She smiled. "It'll crawl back up. Just don't let anyone step on it." We talked for a few minutes, nothing deep. Just stories from her early days in food service, people she'd met, things she'd dropped, burnt, spilled. I listened, laughed when I could, nodded when I couldn't. Before leaving, she said, "Some of us are here to pass through. Others are here to climb." I thought about it. About what I'd come from, about that envelope and what it meant. "I'm here to prove I can stand." That night, I unlocked my tiny studio, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed on the bed fully clothed. My back ached, my hands smelled like onion rings, and my tips barely covered bus fare. But I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Pride, not the loud, boastful kind. The quiet sort. The kind that whispers, "You did this, you showed up, you didn't shrink." I texted Harper back. "Sorry for the delay, I've moved. New job, long story. Wanna grab coffee sometime soon. But maybe not from the cafe I work at. I still don't know how to make their fancy foam hearts." Then I curled up with Grandma's letter beside me on the nightstand. For the first time since the will reading, I didn't feel like someone waiting to be told who she was. I felt like someone beginning to decide for herself. The day it happened started like any other. Alarm blaring too soon, sore feet sliding into already worn shoes, and me whispering affirmations to my reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. "You didn't quit yesterday. That's enough for today." I was 3 weeks into the job and still had to remind myself that being upright was progress. It was a rainy Thursday, the kind Charleston specializes in, soft at first, like the clouds are just thinking about it, and then relentless. By noon, the cafe was packed with damp tourists and regulars seeking refuge from the drizzle. I was balancing a tray with 3 cappuccinos, a hot Americano, and 2 plates of avocado toast, watching my steps, dodging chairs, keeping the tray level with both hands like it was a sacred artifact. And then I hit it. A slick spot on the floor, a betrayal in the shape of a half-wiped spill. My right foot slid forward, my left knee buckled. And then chaos. The tray flipped, cups launched. Liquid flew. The next thing I knew, a geyser of piping hot espresso was drenching a man in a navy blue jacket seated by the window. Oh my God, I'm so sorry," I gasped, my hands instantly flying to my mouth. He flinched, eyes shut tight, his jaw clenched. Coffee pooled in his lap, steamed off his soaked collar. A sharp hiss escaped him as he tried to move. "I just stay still, don't move," I babbled, yanking napkins from my apron, then realizing how utterly useless they were. A chorus of gasps rippled around the cafe. My manager's voice sliced through the air. "Someone call 911, now," the man groaned, leaning forward with his hand pressed to his chest. I crouched beside him, ignoring the growing pool of espresso. "Please, I didn't see the spill, I swear." He looked at me then. Not with rage, not even accusation, just pain and something else, curiosity. "You okay?" he managed through clenched teeth. Me," I blinked. "You're the one who's boiling." His mouth twitched halfway to a grin. "Well, that's one way to get someone's number." The paramedics arrived within minutes. I rode with him in the ambulance because I insisted. I couldn't let him be alone. Or maybe, if I was being honest, I couldn't bear to be left alone with the aftermath. His name was Lucas. He was 30, calm in a way that felt practiced, like someone used to pressure. "Can I hold your hand?" I asked, breathless, as the EMTs strapped him in. Eyes widened, but he nodded once. I gripped his hand like a lifeline. "I'll do anything to make this right," I whispered. I wasn't sure if I meant the coffee burn or something much bigger. At the hospital, I sat on a bench in the ER waiting area, my apron soaked, my socks squishing in my shoes, my manager's words echoing in my head. "You're a liability." I knew what was coming, and I couldn't even blame them. I had injured a customer, accident or not, and probably cost the cafe a lawsuit. But none of that mattered as much as the image I couldn't shake. Luca's wincing in pain, coffee dripping down that crisp navy lapel, still trying to make a joke. An hour later, a nurse came out. "He's stable," she said. "Superficial burns, nothing serious. He asked if you were still here." I stood, my heart thudding. Can I see him?" She smiled. "You made quite the impression," he said, and I quote, "Tell the espresso assassin she owes me a new shirt." I exhaled, laughter and relief tangling together. Maybe it wasn't the worst day after all. The next morning I stood outside the cafe's back door, wet hair pulled into a knot, heart pounding like it already knew what was coming. June met me at the door, no smile this time. "Caroline," she said softly, eyes scanning mine. "He's waiting for you in the office." I nodded. My stomach felt like it had been hollowed out with a spoon. Inside the tiny manager's office, Jason sat behind the desk, arms folded over his chest. The only window behind him leaked in thin gray light, casting the room in something colder than shade. "Sit," he said. I didn't. "I'm sorry," I said before he could start. "It was an accident. I've already checked on the customer. His name's Lucas. He said he's fine." Jason raised a hand. "This isn't about how nice you are, Caroline. It's about risk, liability." I swallowed hard. "Please, I'll pay for damages. I'll even sign a waiver," he sighed, looked down at a manila folder and said the words I'd been dreading. "We have to let you go." Just like that, not even 30 seconds, I blinked. "But I just got here." He nodded, eyes not unkind. "And we liked you, but we can't afford another accident. The owner's nervous. Insurance's already flagged the report." I stood there, arms limp at my sides, hearing the rush of my heartbeat louder than his voice. "I don't want this to define you," he added. "It's a fluke, bad luck, that's all. But bad luck doesn't pay rent. Bad luck doesn't forgive another failure." I thanked him, shook his hand, walked out the back door and stood in the alleyway behind the cafe as the sky opened up with rain. Not the light, misty kind. The kind that drenches your soul. By noon, I'd packed my things from the studio apartment. Rent was due in 2 days and my final paycheck wouldn't cover it. With no safety net, I did the thing I swore I wouldn't do. I went back. The Bishop house stood exactly as I left it. Too neat, too proud. I hesitated at the front steps, suitcase handle clutched in my sweaty palm. I could already picture it, my father's smug glance, Kayla's triumphant eye roll, my mother's thin-lipped sigh, but I was out of options. When I opened the front door, no one looked surprised. Kayla was in the living room, scrolling her phone, one leg draped lazily over the couch arm. "Well, look who's back," she said without even lifting her head. "Hope you didn't burn anyone else on your way in." I stood frozen. No hug, no question. No curiosity about why I was soaked or why my suitcase was back in my hand, just sarcasm, just Kayla. My father appeared in the hallway, coffee mug in hand. "Everything okay?" he asked, though his voice carried no real concern, only the kind of amusement you'd reserve for watching someone lose a bet. "She got fired," Kayla said, finally glancing up. "Didn't you?" I stared at them, at the family I'd been born into but never really belonged to. My father gave a single nod, as if confirming something he'd always suspected. "I figured that job wouldn't last. You never did have much grit when things got hard." I wanted to scream, to throw something, to cry until it all cracked open. But instead I walked past them, up the stairs, and into my old bedroom. Back in the lilac wallpapered box. Back in the house that made me feel small even when I stood up straight. I unpacked slowly, mechanically. Folded clothes I'd worn while trying to be someone new. Set down shoes that still carried the red clay of Charleston streets. And then I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall. It was humiliating. I'd tried. I'd worked hard. I'd fallen, stood back up, and fallen again. And all it had earned me was a one-way ticket back to a house that wanted me broken. But this time, something was different. Because this time, I had a reason not to stay. This time, someone outside these walls had seen me, not as a failure but as a person worth talking to, worth asking, "Are you okay?" And that someone, Lucas, was still out there. The first time I returned to the hospital, I wasn't sure if I was going for closure or penance. I told myself it was the right thing to do to check in, to make sure Lucas was healing. But part of me knew the truth. I needed someone to look at me and not see failure. The front desk nurse raised an eyebrow when I asked for him. "Lucas Harrington," she repeated, tapping at the computer. "Room 512, burn unit follow-up. He's been stable. Only second degree on the shoulder and upper chest." I nodded, clutching the thermos of homemade soup I'd made that morning, because showing up empty-handed felt too much like showing up empty-hearted. When I stepped into his room, Lucas was sitting up in bed, scrolling through his tablet with one arm bandaged and propped on a pillow. He looked different without the jacket. Softer somehow. Less like a corporate poster boy, more like someone who knew what it felt like to hurt. He looked up and smiled. If it isn't the human espresso machine. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. You're alive. Barely, he teased. They tell me I'm lucky to have dodged the biscotti tray. That could have been fatal, I grinned, stepping closer. I brought soup, he eyed the thermos. You didn't make it in a cafe kitchen, did you? Made it myself, I said, setting it on his side table. You can trust it, mostly. He chuckled and reached for the lid. Well, this already beats hospital mashed potatoes. For a moment, we sat in companionable silence, me perched awkwardly on the guest chair, him sipping carefully from a plastic spoon. This is actually good, he said, eyebrows raised in mock surprise. I folded my arms. You expected poison. I expected chaos, you seem to travel with it. I smiled, but it didn't quite reach my eyes. Lucas noticed. Something happened, I looked down. My hands were clasped too tight in my lap. I got fired. He nodded slowly, not shocked, not smug, just understanding. I'm sorry, he said. I'm not, I replied after a moment. I mean I am. But it was always going to happen. I just didn't think it'd hurt this much. Lucas shifted, wincing slightly. Getting burned hurts, figuratively and literally apparently. We both laughed and something in the room lightened. He set the soup aside and glanced at me. So what now? I shrugged. I'm back with my family, temporarily, it's not great. He didn't push, didn't ask for details, just nodded. That small grace, being allowed to share without being dissected, meant more than I could say. After a few minutes, he tilted his head. You want to stay and read something? I'm going stir-crazy in here. I've got exactly 24 hours left before I'm discharged and sent back to the real world. I can read, I said, as long as it's not a finance article or a manual on hedge funds. He grinned. Lucky for you, I've got an old paperback mystery novel I've been meaning to finish. But the nurse says I'm not allowed to hold it open with one hand anymore. Too much strain. I took the book from the nightstand and opened it. I accept the responsibility of narrator, I said solemnly. Don't mess it up, he replied, settling back into his pillows. I read 3 chapters that day, pausing only when he made sarcastic comments or offered dramatic sound effects. We laughed more than we probably should have for a hospital room. When a nurse knocked and reminded me of visiting hours, I stood to leave. I'll come back, I said before I could second-guess it. Tomorrow. Lucas raised an eyebrow. Do I get more soup? I smirked. No promises. The next day, I brought magazines and a crossword puzzle. The day after that, a playlist of instrumental music and a pack of grape-flavored gum he swore was hospital gold. By the end of the week, I knew his favorite movies, the name of his dog growing up, Maximus, a Great Dane who was afraid of cats, and the fact that he didn't like birthday cake but loved pecan pie. One afternoon, as I fluffed his pillow and handed him water, he looked at me with a smile that wasn't teasing for once. You know, he said quietly, you're a terrible waitress but a great friend. The words hit something in me, something fragile I'd been guarding. I brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, playful but soft. At least I'm improving somewhere. We didn't say anything else for a long time. Just sat there, the TV humming quietly in the background, 2 people who met by accident but maybe stayed on purpose. I was folding napkins in the hospital visitor lounge when the nurse came to find me. They're here, she whispered like it was some kind of warning. His parents. I glanced up, my hands freezing mid-fold. Both of them, she nodded, then added softly, you might want to brace yourself. I didn't know what I expected when Lucas first mentioned his family. Maybe warmth, maybe laughter like his. But I hadn't expected them. They arrived like a weather front. His father entered first, tall, sharply dressed, silver cufflinks catching the light even in the sterile hallway. Behind him came a woman with flawless posture, high heels, and a face that looked like it hadn't smiled freely since 1997. Designer everything. Even her worry felt expensive. I was halfway through setting Lucas's water jug when I heard her voice behind me. You must be Caroline. I turned. She was standing just inside the doorway like she didn't plan to stay long. Her husband was beside her, arms crossed, gaze cool and assessing. Yes, I said, brushing hair out of my face too late. He asked me to bring soup, Lucas interrupted from the bed. She brings excellent soup. And she reads chapters in funny voices when I'm bored. His mother's eyebrows rose. Lucas gestured toward me. Caroline, meet the Harringtons. Mom and Dad, this is Caroline Bishop, the one who saved me from death by bland hospital food. His mother walked closer, her heels silent on the linoleum. "We hope your intentions are sincere," she said with a gracious smile that didn't reach her eyes. I blinked. "I'm sorry," she glanced at the bedside bouquet. "Lucas is generous and kind, and sometimes too trusting." My pulse pounded. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't raising her voice, but somehow this was worse. "I'm aware," I said, carefully placing the water pitcher on the tray. "He's also smart. I imagine he can tell when someone's lying to him." Lucas looked amused, but his father didn't. "I think what my wife means," Mr. Harrington said, his voice calm but tight, "is that we're protective, especially after incidents that land our son in a burn unit." I stepped back. "I understand. We just want to ensure that any friendships forming during his recovery are built on mutual understanding," his mother added. "Not pity or opportunity." The word opportunity hung in the air like perfume gone sour. Lucas shifted in bed, clearly uncomfortable now. "Mom, Dad, I think Caroline got the message. You can dial it down." "I'm fine," I said, forcing a small smile. "They're right to ask questions." I wanted to run, but something inside me refused to let these people decide who I was. "I'm not here for money," I said. "I didn't even know who Lucas was when I spilled that coffee. I was just a waitress who made a mistake. I checked on him because I cared, not because I calculated." Lucas looked at me then, really looked, and there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before, pride, maybe even trust. Mr. Harrington offered a tight nod, clearly ready for the conversation to end. "We appreciate your time, Caroline." "Take care," his wife added as they turned to leave. As soon as they stepped into the hallway, Lucas let out a slow breath. "That went great." I looked at him, eyebrows raised. "Seriously," he grinned. "I mean, you only got mildly interrogated, no restraining order. I'd call that a win." But my hands were still trembling. "They think I'm using you," I whispered. Lucas reached out, gently covering my hand with his. "Then they don't know me very well, because if they did, they'd know I don't spend this much time with anyone I don't like." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "I just didn't expect to feel so small." "Don't let their suits fool you," he said. "They walk into every room like they own it, but that doesn't mean you owe them anything." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling tightening in my chest. Not just from them, but from what it stirred in me. Because for a moment, I saw how quickly love could turn conditional. How the people closest to you could ask questions not to understand but to disqualify. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for another family that came with rules and walls. "I should go," I said softly, standing. "Let you rest." Lucas frowned. "You okay?" "I'm fine." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Because I wasn't sure how to explain that it wasn't their suspicion that hurt, it was how familiar it felt. The day Lucas was discharged, the hospital room felt oddly hollow. No hum of machines, no plastic tray of lukewarm mashed potatoes, no reason for me to show up at 10 every morning with soup and sarcasm. He sat at the edge of the bed, slipping on his jacket with a wince. The bandages were thinner now, mostly covered, but the stiffness in his movements reminded me that pain still lived just beneath the surface. "Ready to return to civilization?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Define civilization," he smirked. "Because if it involves my parents hovering with herbal supplements and investment advice, I might fake a relapse." I laughed, but the air between us was tinged with something new, nervous energy. Like we'd crossed an invisible line but hadn't acknowledged it yet. Then he said it. "I'd like to take you out, properly." I blinked. "Like on a date?" He grinned. "Unless you'd prefer I show up at your doorstep with a tray of burning cappuccinos as tradition." I didn't answer right away. Because saying yes felt dangerous, not because of him, but because of me, and all the echoes I was still dragging around from Wilmington and childhood bedrooms and that conference table where my name had become a battleground. Lucas must have noticed the hesitation because his tone softened. "We don't have to call it anything. We could just walk, or talk, or eat overpriced waffles from that place you mentioned last week." I looked down at my hands. "I'm not. I don't exactly feel like someone you bring home to meet the board." He tilted his head. "Good, I've already got enough people in my life who pretend for a living. But your parents are not dating you," he said gently. "I am, or I'd like to, and for the record I don't care what they think." He said it so simply, like it wasn't revolutionary. But to me it was. All my life, love had come with checklists, with conditions. With someone deciding whether I measured up before I even opened my mouth. I looked at Lucas, bandaged, bruised, honest. And for once, I didn't hear the voices that usually drown me, I just heard mine. Okay, I said, my lips lifting. But only if you promise not to make me drink hospital coffee. He stood, grinning. Deal. Our first date wasn't grand. No reservations, no heels, no dim lighting or jazz quartets. It was a walk. Downtown Charleston glowed in that warm, forgiving way it sometimes does at dusk. Cobblestones still slick from the earlier rain, shop windows flickering with soft gold. We strolled past art galleries and old bookstores. Lucas bought us pastries from a vendor cart and didn't flinch when powdered sugar got on his sleeve. At one point, we paused by the waterfront, leaning against the railing in easy silence. This feels weird, I admitted. How so? Like I'm not waiting to be judged or corrected. Lucas didn't say anything right away. He just watched the water, then, maybe that's what it's supposed to feel like. I turned to him. No panic, no punishment, just peace. Peace. I wasn't sure I'd ever had that before, not with a person, not without wondering when it would be taken away. He looked at me, and there was something unspoken in his expression, something soft but cert. I like you, Caroline, he said. And not because you read me detective novels or spilled espresso on my designer jacket. I like you because you're real, and you don't pretend to be anything else. I swallowed hard. Because that was the moment I realized I hadn't been waiting for someone to rescue me. I'd been waiting for someone to see me and not flinch. And he did. 6 months later, I thought I was ready. I'd healed more than I ever expected. I was working part-time at a nonprofit downtown, helping women rebuild after family estrangement, something I understood too well. Lucas had gone back to consulting part-time, taking meetings from cafes and cozy corners of my now-rented apartment. Things were steady, real, good. So when Kayla texted, "Family dinner Sunday, everyone's expected. Bring your boyfriend, I guess." I decided to go. I told myself it would be fine. That I wasn't the same Caroline who left that house with a suitcase full of shame. That I could handle my family now. Lucas offered to drive. "You sure you want me there?" he asked gently as we pulled into the Bishop driveway. "I'm sure," I said, straightening my jacket. "Besides, you owe me. I met your parents and lived to tell the tale." He laughed but didn't press. Just held my hand as we stepped onto the porch like it might keep us both anchored. Inside, everything looked exactly the same. Not a single picture frame moved. Not a single conversation unawkward. Dinner was roast chicken, overcooked asparagus, and a tension so thick it practically steamed off the mashed potatoes. Kayla was in rare form. Hair curled just so. Lip gloss perfectly placed. She tapped her wine glass with her manicured nail and stood dramatically just as dessert was being served. "I have an announcement," she said, beaming. I braced. "Mrs. Evan," she continued, gesturing toward a tall man in a gray blazer beside her. "My fiancé," gasps, applause. My mother stood to hug her. Dad clapped him on the back like he'd just won a trophy. And me, I just smiled and reached for my water, until I heard it. My father raised his glass and said, "To the real wedding worth celebrating." Then he looked at me and added with a smug chuckle, "Oh, and by the way, we gave your wedding trust to Kayla. She's the one who'll need a real wedding." My glass froze midair. "What?" I asked, voice low, brittle. He sipped from his wine like it was nothing. "Well, it was just sitting there, you're not even engaged, it only made sense." I blinked. "That wasn't yours to give." Kayla shrugged, as if the betrayal were merely inconvenient. "Dad handled it, it's not a big deal." Lucas set his fork down slowly. The room was too quiet now. Even Mom had the decency to look down at her plate. I stared at them. My family. The people who had taken everything I had left to cling to and called it fair. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could say anything, Lucas gently touched my arm. "No need," he said, reaching into his pocket. "I've got it handled." And then he pulled out his phone. Lucas didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand up. He didn't even blink at the awkward silence that had settled over the Bishop dining table like fog. He simply pulled out his phone, glanced down at the screen, and said in the calmest, clearest voice I'd ever heard, "Cancel the private jet." The air stilled. Forks hovered mid-bite. Kayla's smile faltered. "I said cancel the jet," Lucas repeated, then looked up, his gaze locking on my father's. "Her parents won't be attending the wedding." My stomach flipped. "Wait, did he just—" "Lucas," I whispered, eyes wide, heartbeat thundering in my ears. He held my hand. Gently, reassuring. But his voice was something else entirely now. Steel wrapped in velvet. Everyone watched as he slipped the phone back into his pocket and calmly wiped his hands on the napkin. And then he dropped it, the truth. "I'm Lucas Harrington," he said. "My family owns Silvercross Holdings." Silence. You could hear the ice melting in the untouched water glasses. My father blinked slowly, his brain trying to catch up with the name. My mother tilted her head, clearly unsure whether this was a joke or something far worse. And Kayla, she looked like someone had just pulled the rug out from under her designer heels. Lucas continued, voice unwavering. "Caroline didn't tell you who I was because she didn't need to. She wasn't with me for the money, the name, or the jet." He looked at me then. "She was with me when I couldn't lift a coffee cup. She showed up when she didn't have to, and she didn't once ask for anything in return." I sat frozen, watching the people who raised me stare at the man I chose. He turned back to my father. "You stole her inheritance to reward someone who tears her down, and then you toasted to it like it was a joke. Let me be very clear, Caroline will never be disrespected by you again. Not now, not ever." Kayla scoffed, forcing a laugh. "Oh, come on, this is dramatic. It was just a wedding trust." "No," I said, finally finding my voice. "It was the last thing Grandma left me." "And you stole it." She opened her mouth, then shut it. My mother blinked quickly like she didn't know which side of the table to sit on anymore. Lucas stood and offered me his hand. I took it. Without a word we walked out, past the stunned silence. Past my father's slack jaw, past my mother's flickering guilt, past Kayla's clenched jaw. The front door clicked softly behind us. And just like that I knew, I didn't lose a family, I'd just outgrown one. The sky in Napa Valley that morning looked like it had been painted just for us. Soft blues kissed with streaks of peach and gold, the air still enough to make every word carry. I stood at the top of the vineyard path in my wedding dress. Nothing grand, nothing overdone. Ivory, simple lines, soft lace at the sleeves. Grandma's locket rested against my collarbone, warm from my skin. It felt like she was here. Like maybe she'd always been the only one who truly saw me. Rows of white chairs lined the vineyard lawn, guests already seated, friends, mentors, even June from the cafe who beamed when she saw me approach. But it was the empty seats near the front that drew my eyes. Two of them, reserved. Mother and father printed in elegant cursive on creamy cardstock. No one would sit there. And I didn't want them to. This was not their moment. They had forfeited it long before they signed Kayla's engagement card with the money meant for me. Lucas stood at the end of the aisle, his navy suit perfectly tailored, but his expression even more so steady, full of quiet awe, like he still couldn't quite believe I'd said yes. The music swelled softly. I stepped forward. Each footstep felt lighter than the one before. This wasn't a performance. This wasn't an obligation. This was a reclamation. By the time I reached him, I wasn't thinking about Wilmington, or the oak-paneled office, or the backhanded compliments over soggy casseroles. I was thinking about the hospital room where he laughed through bandages, about bookstore strolls, burnt pancakes on Sunday mornings, and the way his voice never rose, even when mine did. The officiant began. I barely heard the words, because all I could hear was Lucas whispering, just for me, "You've always deserved everything, Caroline, I'm just here to witness it." And when we exchanged vows, I didn't promise perfection. I promised presence, effort, truth. And that I'd never again shrink myself to make others feel tall. When we kissed, the guests cheered. A few happy tears sparkled, and under that pale golden sky, something inside me healed completely. Later, at the reception under string lights and wildflowers, June hugged me and whispered, "Told you you had heart." I smiled. It just needed the right soil. And when Lucas twirled me on the dance floor, I caught a glimpse of those two empty seats again. I didn't look away. I just let them stay empty, because I wasn't missing anything anymore. A year later, I sat by the window of our home office, morning light spilling across the hardwood floors, the smell of fresh coffee drifting in from the kitchen. Lucas was somewhere downstairs, probably arguing with the espresso machine again. I opened my laptop and clicked publish. The headline of my op-ed glowed back at me from the screen. "Dignity begins with distance, on losing the family you were born into and finding the one you build." It took me weeks to write it. Months, really. Not because the words were hard to find, but because I wanted to tell the truth. The kind that aches. The kind that frees. I didn't name names. I didn't drag anyone through the mud. I told my story about the girl who was told to be grateful for crumbs and called difficult when she asked for a full meal. I talked about the day I walked out of my childhood home for the last time, and how strange it felt to lose people who were supposed to be permanent, but I also talked about love. The real kind. The kind that shows up with soup when you're hurting. That listens when you spiral. That lets you fall apart and still hands you the thread when you're ready to stitch yourself back together. That day, my inbox flooded with messages from women all over the country. Some were still living in houses that made them small. Some had just walked away, shaking with fear. And some had already rebuilt their lives from the rubble, standing tall and scarred but free. I didn't answer every message. I couldn't, but I read them all, and I cried for all of us. Later that afternoon, Lucas poked his head into the room. "Hey," he said, holding up 2 coffee mugs, "your article's trending." I turned to him, eyes wide. "Seriously," he nodded, smiling. "And the foundation's site is blowing up, donations. Inquiries, someone just emailed about partnering on a mentorship program." I blinked, overwhelmed. Because what started with loss had grown into something that could help others rise. We'd named the foundation Rose and Root, after my grandmother's garden and the way we all deserve to bloom from a place that feels like ours. We offered temporary housing, job training, therapy access, tools for women starting over after family estrangement, domestic abuse, or toxic upbringings. And somehow, it all began with one broken trust fund and a coffee spill. Later that night, June and I sat across from each other at a cozy corner cafe. I told her everything about the wedding, the op-ed, the messages. She sipped her tea and smirked. "Turns out losing everything was the best wedding gift you ever got." I laughed. Because she was right, I didn't have the family I started with, but I had love, I had purpose, I had peace, and most of all, I had myself.